Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward. I have a passion to bring hope and breakthrough to those experiencing the toughest times of their lives. In this podcast, we will give you critical insights and revelations as I interview people just like you, those who have been right where you are and understand exactly what a wilderness season is all about. It's real, it's raw, it's practical. Come join the conversation. Welcome to the Wilderness Season podcast. Hello and welcome back to the Wilderness Season podcast. I'm your host, Sherry Ward, and we have Rob Miner again. Welcome, Rob. Good to have you.
Good to be back.
So today what we're going to be talking about is detoxing the wilderness. Boy, I feel like it's a liver detox or something.
Which is not pleasant. I've had those too.
Yeah, we're going to detox that wilderness. So there's things in our wilderness that get just emotions, I guess. A lot of feelings, a lot of emotions of years and years and years of waiting for that to happen. Mm-hmm. And when we wait for all those years, I feel like there's some kind of residual feelings that need to come off. And one of the biggest ones for me was disappointment. I don't know if that's, we'll talk about what was your big
I'm
one.
Sure that's pretty universal.
Yeah. And it's different because I actually looked up like the difference between disappointed and discouraged. And I feel like discouraged is when you like I want that ice cream or I want to go somewhere, and you get discouraged because it doesn't happen. And it's more of a thing, whereas disappointment is in a person. Like you had an expectation for a person, you had an expectation for God to show up, and what seemingly he didn't show up the way that you thought he would show up or the way I thought he would show up. And disappointment was just a huge one for me that I really had to let that go.
Yeah, no doubt. There's been a lot of disappointment along the way. Yeah, and it's a mystery of how that happens. We talked in one of the earlier episodes about the difference between the passive night of the soul and the active night of the soul, which is not, I don't know if there's anywhere in Scripture where it says the passive or the active night. It was just a terminology that the St. John of the Cross used to explain or to help us understand the difference between, like, there's all these things I need to learn. There's all these lessons that God is trying to teach me. But at the same time, more significant than that, there's a God who is working in the darkness and the mystery behind the scenes in ways that we don't understand, inputting the data that needs to be input into our system.
And do you feel like, what was your number one like residual feeling coming out of the wilderness? Was it disappointment? Was it anger? Was it fear? Like what was the thing that was sticking to you that you had to just finally let it go when you were crossing over into the promised land?
There's a lot of different ways I can answer that. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind, which I shared in the last podcast, is there was this broken record that I kept playing of trying to make sense of God in the midst of it. Going back to that story of Joseph, when it says in Genesis 50, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Did God mean it for good? Meaning that he purposely designed everything, or did God just kind of roll with the punches and work a bad situation out for good? Which was it? And God has to be sovereign. He has to know the end from the beginning. There's no wrong turns with God. There's no this person derailed my promise because they have free will. And it was a mental game. I kept getting stuck in my mind trying to make sense of everything. That's good. So I had to let go of my need to understand. Obviously, I had to let go of a certain relationship. There was one in particular that, it was a double-sided coin because on one hand, I really liked this woman. I mean, I was ready to commit to spend the rest of my life with this person. But more than that, I felt betrayed by God, where I'm like, I was 100% convinced that you were behind this. This doesn't make any sense at all. But I don't know if it's, in either regard, whether it's the first example I gave, the second, or a third one that I could offer you if I took time to think about it. And there were others that I had to let go of. I don't know if it's so much a matter of, okay, I'm going to choose to let go. I mean, A common theme that we've been seeing throughout these podcast series is you are on a journey. I like using that because
Sounds like Star Trek. You're on a journey.
Well, I like using
in a land far, far away.
And that's, I think, partly why we love movies, is because, you know, when you watch a movie like The Lord of the Rings or The Chronicles of Narnia or The Matrix, you know, the character doesn't know where this is all going, but there's someone writing the script that does. And the more important thing is not so much did I learn the lesson I need to learn, but did you learn that there's someone who's writing the script that's going to finish what he has begun?
That's good. That's really good. And I feel the same way. But one time in the journey, and this is right where, if you listen to my testimony in episode 1, God had me sign a blank contract, and then just all hell broke loose after that. I mean, it was thing after thing after thing. And every member of my family got sick, and 5 car accidents, and all the financial fallout, and my sons were sick, and like all this stuff was hitting just like a Job. It's like one after another after another. And that's the story that I told, where I felt like the enemy came through the window in my bathroom. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'll make you a deal. If you stop moving forward with Square Tree Publishing, which is the name of my company, I'll make all this trouble go away. So at that point for me, that particular issue got settled. Because it's like I knew that the enemy was the one behind it all. But when he shows up at your windowsill, knocking on your door, doing a demonic let's make a deal, you know, then you know, okay, this is not God doing all of this. Right. But then you can kind of spin out and they're like, well, did God allow it to happen? And, you know, that whole thing. So I think there's a lot of different emotions. But again, disappointment was the number one thing. And it was really interesting because we just recently put a bid on a second house. And when we put the bid on the house, it fell through and it didn't happen. And then I said, God's got something better. Now, that's not something new that I would have said at any time, because I would have forced myself to say it out of my mouth, but I really wouldn't believe it truly. And this was the first time when I said it, I meant it. And so I felt like, wow, disappointment finally has been broken off of me. And I'm kind of detoxing out of the wilderness, as I call it, because that stuff is finally lifted, that spirit of disappointment. Because I think there's feelings, and then there's sometimes like a spirit of disappointment that happens.
Yeah, you know, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, you know, the doctrine of the Ishmael, like, don't produce an Ishmael. How many times have you heard that before teachings about, you know, warning against producing Ishmaels? And it can be such an abstract idea. Like, what do you even mean by that? And I think a good way to understand that is an Ishmael, like something is an Ishmael to the degree that you're grasping, that you're straining, that you're trying to make something happen. You're trying to fit a triangle into a rectangular peg or whatever. And God's agenda is to cause us to enter into that rest. I mean, that's another way of saying the faith journey. Faith is a resting position. It's a resting experience. And so detoxing in the wilderness is a journey of learning to let go. You know, whether you're in the wilderness of the crossing over or the promised land, and it's such an abstract idea, it's like, really, how do we even know where we're at? There's no signpost on the top of the door that says, you're now in the wilderness, 2 miles to the crossing over. I mean, it doesn't work that way.
I feel like that Indiana Jones when he was on that motorcycle and you see the sign and it's like, do I go to Berlin or do I go over here? You know, it's like, which way do you go?
Right. So it's like, I still experience disappointment now. Now, where am I? Am I in the wilderness, the crossing over, the promised land? If I had to choose, if it was a multiple choice test, I'd say I'm in my promised land. But there's still elements of the crossover and the wilderness, even the promised land. There's still disappointments. But the difference, kind of like you're saying.
I think it's a spirit.
The detoxing process is like sandpaper that is, it's refining you on each side. There's the wild hopes and expectations. Oh my God, God's about to come through. God's amazing. It's like, okay, take a chill pill. You're getting too anxious. Or, oh my God, God failed me again. And it's like, okay, now we need to sand that side. That quick reaction to disappointment, where you come to that place little by little as you're sanded on both sides, where you're like, your will be done. You're still in the driver's seat. I don't understand it, but I don't need to understand it. Just keep going.
Yeah, when we did bid on that house and it didn't go through, and then I said those words of, "Okay, God, you just have something better." A friend of mine just said, "I really feel like God's saying that He's proud of you because you really mean it, and because you are open, literally open to that, then something better is going to come." And then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "As specific as you ask is as specific as you get." And so I just took my journal out and I'm like, okay, then I just need to write down exactly what I wanted in a house and what I want in an investment property and just start writing down things. And, we found another house and it checked off a lot of those boxes and it was under market value. And, it needs a lot of work, but there's just a lot of really good things about this house that was way better than the other one, because the other house had a neighbor we could just tell was going to be one of those kind of neighbors, the nosy neighbor that's going to complain about everything. And this house, I've already met the neighbors and they're fantastic.
Yeah, I'm really contemplating whether I should say this or not, because
Go for it on this.
I don't want to go off on some wild tangent where someone's like, I don't think you should be going there, because this is a blurry line. So a lot of us have heard of this law of attraction, okay?
Yeah.
Which is not biblical, but it's not far off. I mean, we need to understand, here's the difference. Whenever you remove God from the equation, it's a false doctrine. It's like, I am in Christ, period. Every branch in the tree derives from that. It doesn't matter what you do, no matter how benevolent, no matter how powerful it is. I mean, there's people working on technology where we can become one with computers and, one day achieve eternity, achieve eternal life, and I can program a system where I can enter this virtual reality, enjoy the life of my dreams. That's great. It's a fantasy. It's outside of God. But the idea of this, in the kingdom of heaven, we do live by faith. Mm-hmm. And faith sounds different. It acts different. It responds different. It makes choices from a different place. And so the detox process that we go through is a refining of that faith. And in that place, again, I speak differently. I'm more proactive. I can let go of the past and move on. I can run at Goliath instead of pulling out my slingshot and be like, I don't know if I should do this. Should I really pull the slingshot back this far? It's you become more of a polished arrow, so to speak, as opposed to kind of wishy-washy.
Yeah. And I think also in the natural, when we detox, it kind of looks worse sometimes. Like we feel worse almost before we get better. So I think it's just taking off all that stuff. And like you said, maybe you will have little bouts of disappointment here or there, but it's a feeling rather than a spirit of disappointment that's heavy on you. And I remember one time I went up for prayer at a really Pentecostal church that we went to years and years ago. And I went up for healing and the pastor prayed for me something completely different. I mean, it was out to me, left field. And then he tells me after he prays for me, I know you came up for healing. God told me you came up for healing. He said, but that's not what you need to go after right now. This is what God's telling you, not that. And I went in the car with my best friend and I was so bummed. And she felt it in the car. She goes, it's too heavy in here. I'm out. And she got out of the car and just left because it was just so heavy for her. And I think it was that spirit of disappointment, where when you start being in the wilderness and you start that faith journey like you talk about, and it's a process, then you begin to trust God more and more and more. And I think the disappointment finally came off and it felt so good. It really did.
Faith is a funny thing, or I should say the way God builds faith is a funny thing. Like we have this mentality that success breeds, this is how the world system works, success breeds confidence. But that's not the way the kingdom of heaven works. Surrender equates to faith. Like oftentimes God builds my faith through rejection, through disappointment, through people failing me, through me striking out, and
Right.
you know,
Right.
because it's in that place, it's in the pressure of the disappointment where I come to this crossroads. It's like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for the praise of others, or am I doing it for God? Am I going to give up because they don't respond? Or am I going to just continue to say, you know what, I don't have what it takes. I give up. Or are you going to trust the God who spoke that promise into you? And so it's the disappointments that refine that faith, where it truly is, it's no longer I who live. It's Christ who lives in me. He's writing the story. He just calls me to keep going. And you just shake the dust off and you learn to keep going.
That reminds me of that story I've told a while ago, but it's the arrow story where the girl was praying for me. One of my friends was praying for me, and she saw arrows, and she saw the bullseye, and there was a bunch of ones on the bullseye that didn't hit the target, or I'm sorry, the target, and it didn't hit the bullseye, and all these other ones outside, and there was even some that fell on the ground. And then she saw one come back and just totally nail it on the bullseye. And she's like, oh, yay, God, like Sherry finally hit a bullseye. And he said, no, I'm more proud of her for the times that she didn't hit the bullseye, because she never gave up. And that time where you pull back on the bow and arrow, and you just pull back and you pull back, because every time you're pulling back, I'm strengthening her arm every time she pulls it back and she goes for it, whether she hits it or not. And that's really freeing. That's really freeing to be able to know, hey, if I totally missed it, I was still going after it with everything I had.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, God honors faith. I shared this in one of the earlier podcasts, but there was this guy that this guy's faith journey is like second to the Apostle Paul. This is the type of guy who God says, go to Ecuador, and he goes to the airport, and he's like, why am I going to Ecuador? I don't have any money. I don't know where I'm going, but God said go to Ecuador. So he goes to an airport, and there's a guy waiting there saying, hey, God told me to give you $1,000. And it's like, this is unreal. Like, people don't actually live like this. Yeah. And I had the honor of being able to have a conversation with him. And he said something that I have a feeling is going to stick with me for a very long time. It's one of those things that never really leaves you. Yeah. He said, God's love language is obedience. And so he understands, like, you're frail. You're made out of jars of clay. Right, your weaknesses, your failures, your shortcomings, duh. I mean, in God's mind, he put his glory in jars of clay. That's part of his excitement, is that in all your inadequacies, you continue to go on this journey with him. Mm-hmm. But he said, God's love language is obedience. So, like, whether you actually heard God right or not is not even really the issue to him. Like, you could have been totally deceived, but if you were convinced in your mind, this is God, and I'm going for it, and I'm going to knock that giant on his butt, he's like, yes, that's my son. And that takes a lot of pressure off. He's looking for our response, not for us to get everything right.
I agree with that. I agree. He looks at the effort and that we are going after it when he tells us to. So one of the other ones, detoxing in the wilderness, is anger. And anger, if you look at the Enneagram, I'm a 9. My daughter's super into this, okay? So she analyzes me, and it took her to like 3 months. No, Mom, you're this number. No, Mom, you're that number, okay? So we finally...
I never even had a number before.
I didn't have a number. Yeah, then you fight it. I'm not a number. I'm a person. So I guess I'm a 9, and a 9 is the peaceful one, right? So
I don't know. I've never taken it.
Okay.
I don't know
so the 9 is like the peacemaker and all that. So I had a hard time with anger because I didn't realize I had anger coming out of the wilderness. And anger is a secondary emotion, and I didn't realize, because it's like, no, we want to keep the peace, want to keep everything nice, right? Yeah. I didn't even realize that. And finally I had to come to grips with that with God and say, look, I'm angry. I'm angry at you. And that was a hard statement, because I didn't want to be angry at God. But when I came clean with it and said, I think it's buried under there, but I think I really am angry. Yeah. I don't know if you went through any...
Oh, yeah. I've become convinced that some of the angriest people are some of the sweetest and quietest people. Because...
Oh, interesting.
I mean, the more open I am, and I've learned this is even like when I've voice my ideas on Facebook, or whether I'm having coffee with someone, or whether I'm sharing ideas in a podcast, whatever it is, it's like the more free I am to just toss the filter and just speak from the hip, the less angry I am. Why? Because I'm constantly taking out the trash. Whatever I'm feeling, it's like I am free to speak.
You are a verbal processor.
But yeah, it's like when you live this constrained lifestyle of I can't say this, or I can't have these feelings towards God. This is not right. You hold that anger in.
And it really affects your body too when you do that.
Oh, it absolutely. Oh,
yeah. Health issues.
Can tell you it can completely wear your body down.
Yeah. So I feel like that's one thing that when I finally came clean to the Lord, he already knew it. He already knew it. So it wasn't any surprise to him, like, surprise.
No.
You know, he already knew how I was feeling. It was just me coming clean with that and finally realizing it as well. And that was one of the things that I had to detox. And then we had to have a discussion about that. Okay, you know.
Is that what you call it? I have a different word. I'm like, God, put on your boxing gloves. Come on, God, we're going at it. We're going nine rounds with the Almighty here.
And I'm more like, I'm mad at you. Wow. You know.
Sometimes the difference between a guy and a woman, you know, we have a more passionate way of expressing ourselves at times.
That's so funny. So what other feelings, like fear, or what other things did you feel like you had to detox coming out of the wilderness that kind of hung on for a while that you finally kind of dropped off?
I mean, the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's all interrelated, you know, fear and insecurity and depression and anger. It's all interrelated. You know, God can deal with one issue and, you know, 30% of your fear, anxiety, depression, insecurity, and everything else falls off with it. We're complicated beings. I mean, I think for me, the root has been insecurity, whether it's relationships with women, whether it's the way I perceive myself as a teacher. You know, for the first 14 years of my teaching career, I saw myself at best as a average teacher. Like any given time.
I would have never guessed that because you were really good.
Oh, any given time.
You could just tell.
Over my first 13 years, if you said, here, you give yourself a grade. How did you do as a teacher this year? The best grade I would have ever given myself is maybe a B-.
Wow.
You know, when it comes to ministry, you know, seeing the responses of others, I'm like, I have no influence at all. Like, I have a astounding influence over 4 individuals. You know, it's so God has refined that in a lot of different ways.
So do you feel like in the wilderness, to me, for lack of a better word, I got beaten down so much. And I know one of the words I kept using a lot was I felt like I was spiritually waterboarded. And I felt like God said, don't say that. The Holy Spirit said, don't say that. And then when I looked up that word, it meant torture. He's like, not torture.
I'm not torturing you, Sharon.
It felt like that, though. It totally felt like torture, you know? But I feel like, you know, you totally are completely laid out in the wilderness and you're wiped out. And sometimes it's hard after that and humbled to like the bare bones of everything, that then it's almost like he has to rebuild you back up. Because you're completely laid out, you know?
This is part of the mystery of the Christian walk. The idea of there is an enemy. There is warfare. And it's hard to grasp, like, how does the sovereignty of God work in the midst of that? I had a prophetic word once that says, God's taken out the shrapnel.
Ooh.
I'm like, well, how did shrapnel even get into me? I mean, who was shooting at me? And I've actually had a few different words like that over the years.
Wow.
Something to the respect of the warfare is real.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this is not from God. Yeah. There is an enemy that is trying to take you out. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about detox in the wilderness, there's a lot of different things going on. You know, we're being detoxed from wounds from the past. Mm-hmm. We're being detoxed from patterns. if you've had the same pattern repeat over and over and over, and you're trying to break free, like, how do I have a victorious mindset if I failed the last 8 times?
Yeah.
And there's also the element of there's very real warfare. Like, how can I really trust you going forward? How can I know that you're going to bring me into my promised land when there is a spiritual enemy that is trying to take me out? Yeah. But here's the thing about the enemy, and here's how I think, if it's possible to even explain how both God's work and the enemy's work make sense together.
We're all on edge.
is that, like, the enemy really only has as much power as the power that you give him. And this is why we need to be healed. So, like, if I have a wound of rejection, God, this always happens to me. Why is this? How did I end up in this? He's like, I found an entry point. And you can bet I'm going to capitalize on that, exploit that entry point.
Exactly.
And I think to some degree God allows that because he's like, well, I'm training you to be an overcomer.
That's good.
I am training you to rule and to reign with me. I mean, Scripture even says we're going to rule and reign with him in eternity. And so we need to learn, okay, that's the enemy, that's not God. That's a lie, that's not truth. That's a disappointment, let it go, God's still on the throne.
I like your shrapnel analogy. I think that's really good. And I feel like when he does take the shrapnel out, we have what I call spiritual scar tissues. So it's not like we go back to the way we were and our skin goes the same. Mm-hmm. I feel like spiritual scar tissues, and I always remember this, and I haven't really fleshed this out yet, so it's kind of a half revelation, but Jesus, after the cross, when he showed him, he said, look at my hands. Mm. So he still had that proof of everything that he went through. Yeah. So I feel like coming out of that shrapnel period, if you could say that, and being healed, we really do come out stronger, and we're not the same. Yeah. We're totally not the same.
Well, not only not our same, but that becomes the foundation of our authority, our power. Yeah. Yeah. It's because that's how we help people. If someone is in the wilderness or someone's struggling with something and they don't see any way out, and you've been there and you've come through the other side, now you have the authority to speak into their life because you've been there.
Overcomer.
You can navigate the land that they can't.
Yes, and you've overcome that part.
And really, the more that you minister to people in that, the more it solidifies the victory. Because when you're in the wilderness, one of the things that we get stuck on is this victim mentality.
Oh, yeah, I got called out on that. My friend said, you haven't. I'm like, no, I don't. No, I don't. I don't have it.
That's a good friend because
I don't want it, but I don't have it.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I would, ask people to go out to coffee or hey, call someone on the phone. Hey, I need to talk, and it's just like a broken record. I keep playing the same thing over and over. Because I need to process this. Yeah. Well, you need to let go. And,
That's good.
The more that we share our testimony, they overcame by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony.
Right.
The more you communicate in such a way as though I was there, but I have overcome, the more that you reinforce in you a victorious mindset, an overcomer's mindset, and it is finished mindset. Right. As opposed to it's in process and we're never going to get to the finish line.
Yeah. And we talked about how important our words were because our words lead the way. And I can't tell you, coming back to that story, how many times I said, God's got something better. Mm-hmm. But this time when I said it, it was like something had broken off and I was really feeling it. Because I have forced myself to say many things throughout the years and let my words lead and my feelings just were in the back trunk. They didn't even catch up for years to what I was saying.
Yeah, and it's easy to get stuck there because we could be like, I don't know if I really deserve better or, I don't need better. This is good enough.
Yeah, that humble pie stuff, that's the fake humble pie. Oh, no, it's all God. No. I'm a worm.
Right. I think, that's part of the detoxing is God is detoxing us from, I've heard it called the orphan spirit, but there's a lot of different ways you can describe it, but it's that inferiority thinking. Moses called himself the most humble man alive. You got to have a lot of confidence to call yourself the most humble man alive. As funny as that sounds, because I think that's part of the detoxing process where, like, I don't need to try to be humble anymore. Like, I know who I am now. I know that everything I have is by grace.
Right.
I have failed and been rejected and just had my works come to nothing so many times. It's like, duh, I get it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to live there anymore. I've lived in the dump so long. I choose to put on my authority of Christ. I choose to stay in that authority of Christ. And when disappointment comes or things in the physical that say, you know what, this is your reality. You really aren't all that.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to listen to that. I know what God has spoken into my life, and that is what I'm going to stand on.
And one tough transition when I had to let go of a business relationship, I forced myself to say, I am so excited about this next season I'm coming into. I'm so excited about this next season. I said it every 5 minutes, and that's no exaggeration. Like, every time my mind started spinning out on all the, they did this to me, and they did that, and they used me, and da da da. It's like, I am so excited about this season. And it's so funny because it's, I don't know, been a year and a half now.
Yeah.
And I said it the other day, and I meant it. It's like, I meant it, but the cool thing is I feel like I'm in a season where God's bringing it right back with a big box with a big red bow on top. And you know what he told me? He said, I'm excited about this new season you're coming into. And I'm like, yes, yes, it's coming. I have no idea what it looks like, but I'm excited. I'm all in. Thank you.
And then you wake up the next day and nothing's really changed.
Yeah.
Like, you don't look excited. Yeah. Absolutely.
That's so funny. So I know that he like completely turns things around. And I know that he wants relationship with us. I know that he was really going after that. My testimony of signing the blank contract and, again, bringing it around full circle with the big red bow. He said, I'm going to fulfill on everything that I put on that contract to you. And he said, I'm going to fulfill on that. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'll do whatever you want. And he's like, but I'm not looking for a servant. I'm looking for a relationship with you. I'm looking for a friend. Mm-hmm. So we could be in this part where we're doing things out of obedience, like you talked about, which is good.
Right.
But he wants it even more than that. He wants relationship.
Yeah, actually, you really you spoke to my heart on that one, because this is something that I've been talking to God about a lot just in the last 24 hours, including this morning. Because this season's been so busy. Yeah. Like, this is one of several different opportunities that God has opened up. And my life is moving so fast. I'm juggling so many balls right now.
Can't relate.
And it has been harder to connect with God. I'm being really honest with that, I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning. And I just went in my closet and I was just like, I have to spend time with you. I don't care if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's like I feel such a disconnect. Yeah. And I didn't even know what to say. I was just silent for like 20 minutes. I'm just like, I have to get into God's presence because I've been so busy. Yeah. And so, I've said this before. It doesn't matter what season we're in. I mean, we could be 10 years into our promised land. We could have captured every city in the promised land. But there's going to be times where God continues to reinforce that, because you're right. Ultimately, it is about relationship. It's about walking side by side and living this journey with him.
The process.
But we instinctively get so caught up in all the stuff, including the significance. Oh, this is amazing stuff. God's doing this, that, and the other. And it's like, okay, but it's significant because you're doing it with me. Right. Slow down.
Not for me.
And be with me in this moment and move forward from that position.
I feel that. I felt even this last week was super crazy busy for me. And I felt like he said, I miss you. Hello. Remember me. I'm God. I'm up here, I miss you. Yeah. So this has been really awesome just to talk about detoxing the wilderness. Do you have any other last minute thoughts before we wrap it up today?
There was one thing in my notes that this was the main thing I wanted to share, and we never got to it. So
go for it.
I think this is the time to share it. Detoxing, I think another way so detoxing means you have toxins in your system. And those toxins, and I'm talking at a physical level, when you have
Right.
toxins in your system, you may feel tired, you may feel cranky, you may feel sore, whatever it is. And so when you detox, you're getting all that crud out of your system.
Right.
So I think another way of defining toxins at a spiritual level is idolatry. And so when God is breaking off idolatry in your life, one way that you can define it is, how far have I come in terms of like being delivered from my pain? Like for years when I'd be in social circumstances, it was just painful. I didn't even know why. Just like, I got to go home. I don't know why, you know, and
There was a woundedness
yeah, it was like it was leaking, or a sense of void.
Oh, okay.
Like there was so many years of my life, I just felt empty. Like I desperately had to fill something in me. And this is why God will sometimes takes us on journeys of isolation. I was like, I feel so alone. And it's like, well, yeah, because it's in that place where you have nothing that you come to learn that I can have wholeness. Even when you can find wholeness in the nothingness,
Yeah.
then you don't leak when disappointments or rejections or failures come, because I'm already complete. You can't take anything from me. I'm already...
Oh, that's good. Say that again, because that was good.
I don't remember what I just said, but the idea being, it's like, if I'm complete in Christ, and this goes back to what you were saying about, it's about union with Him. Like all the stuff in our promised land, that's just icing on the cake. And that's why when we are in the wilderness, when we're in the prison like Joseph, or whether we're on the mountaintop like Joseph, you know, who's come into the palace, it's still just life with Christ. It's still life in Christ. At a core level, nothing has changed at all.
Right.
And that's what He's trying to hammer home in us.
I would agree with that.
Another way of measuring that is our compulsion to sin. Like, for example, if I fail or I get rejected or things didn't go the way that I hoped they would, the less we're compelled to, I need to do something to make myself feel better.
Yeah.
That's a sign that the idol is breaking.
Oh, that's good too. I like that.
The way that we live our life, you know, as idolatry crumbles, we find that we become more proactive individuals. That passivity in many regards it's a protective measure. It's
That's good too.
Because we have woundings of disappointment, rejection, whatever it is, we subconsciously play safe. We surrender, or we retreat a lot.
Right,
we can't stay in the ring of life. We can't keep moving forward and being aggressive and taking risks because we're working so hard trying to protect ourselves from getting hurt again.
Yeah, I could see that.
So
More that protective mode.
I just wanted to give listeners some concrete ways of understanding. Like, I remember experiencing this, but now I'm here. That's a good way of measuring how much the idol has broken in your life.
And I like how you're talking about idols, because so many times, you think of the little stick figure idols, or preachers will talk about the idols, but the way that you're describing it, I think is really good, about all the mindsets that go with it and detoxing those off. Well, thank you so much. This has been another great episode that we've both enjoyed. We hope you enjoy it, because we're enjoying our...
I know I'm enjoying it.
We're enjoying it. So thank you again for joining us on the Wilderness Season podcast. Until next time, see you soon. Thank you for listening to the Wilderness Season podcast. If you need help navigating through your own wilderness season, pick up a copy of my book, A Journey Out of the Wilderness, available on Amazon. Also, continue the conversation online with us by going to our Wilderness Season Facebook page. For resources and events, you can go to www.sherrylynnward.com. If you have enjoyed this show, please subscribe and review our podcast. Just remember, you're not alone.